I've come to hate mandatory self-improvement. My therapist insists these community activities will help with my reintegration issues, whatever the hell that means. 12 years in private security after the military left me with precisely two skills: spotting threats and neutralizing them. Neither particularly helpful at the Detroit Public Library's Wednesday night book club. "You must be new." A voice like warm honey, slightly husky. I turned to find a woman with fiery red hair, intelligent blue eyes behind stylish frames. "That obvious?" I asked, already scanning exits out of habit. "You've checked the fire escape route 3 times in 5 minutes. She smiled, extending a slender hand. "Catherine Lewis." I took her hand, noting the firm grip. "Hope Howard." "Let me guess." Catherine tilted her head. "You picked the glass corridor too?" I nodded, surprised. It was an obscure psychological thriller that most people found disturbing, not exactly book club material. "That ending was complete bullshit," she said, dropping into the chair beside me. "The protagonist deserved better." "Exactly." Catherine's eyes lit up with passion. "Everyone keeps talking about the brilliant twist, but to me it completely betrayed the character development." Just like that, we were deep in debate. Catherine had this way of leaning forward when making a point, her hair falling across one eye. I found myself mirroring her posture, forgetting to check the exits. The discussion was supposed to be moderated, but our exchange quickly hijacked the entire session. Catherine argued that the author took the easy way out with shock value. I countered that sometimes life doesn't give you neat resolutions. "You sound like you know something about messy endings," she said during a lull. "Security specialist," I explained. "Former military." "Ah," her eyebrows raised. "And what exactly are you securing these days, Hope Howard?" "Mostly corporate executives who think they're more important than they are." Catherine laughed, a genuine sound that seemed to resonate in my chest. "I make documentaries. Currently working on something about urban renewal and displacement." "That explains the analytical mind," I said, surprising myself with the compliment. After the session ended, we lingered in the parking lot. Detroit's skyline glittered against the darkening sky while Catherine told me about her current project. I found myself listening not just to her words, but to the cadence of her speech, the way her hands moved expressively. "You're staring," she finally said. "Professional hazard. I observe people." "And what do you observe about me?" She stepped closer, the smell of her perfume, something with sandalwood, making it harder to maintain my usual detachment. "You're passionate but guarded. You care deeply but pretend not to. And you deliberately picked a controversial book tonight to stir things up." Catherine's smile faltered. "That's unsettlingly accurate. Like I said, it's what I do." We exchanged numbers under the pretense of continuing our literary debate. As I watched her drive away, I realized I'd spent 2 hours without checking my surroundings once. My therapist would be thrilled. I didn't expect to hear from Catherine again. Women like her, intelligent, creative, vibrant, didn't typically orbit my world of threat assessments and security protocols. But she texted the next morning with another book recommendation. 3 days later, we met for coffee. This time, she wore her hair up, revealing a delicate neck I found myself staring at while she discussed Russian literature. When I finally shared stories from my military days, the sanitized versions, she listened with an intensity I wasn't used to, as if trying to see through the gaps in my narrative. "You know," Catherine said as we parted, "most people just see what I create. You seem to see me." I didn't tell her that's exactly what terrified me. Because beneath her creative exterior and my protective shell, we'd recognize something in each other, a shared understanding of life's vulnerabilities that no book club discussion could adequately explore. I didn't expect to see Catherine again so soon, and certainly not like this, standing in my office looking like she hadn't slept in days. 3 weeks had passed since our last coffee meetup. "I need to hire you," she said without preamble. I gestured to the chair across from my desk, switching instantly to professional mode. "Tell me what's happening." Catherine sat down, placing her phone on my desk. "Started with emails about my documentary, then social media, now this." She slid the phone toward me. The text message read, "You think exposing the truth makes you important? I'll show you what happens to people who don't mind their business." "How long?" I asked, scrolling through the messages. 2 weeks. At first I thought it was just trolling, my work can be controversial. But yesterday someone followed me home. I leaned back, studying her. The confident woman from the book club looked diminished somehow, shadows under her eyes. Something protective stirred in my chest. "Tell me about anyone who might want to intimidate you," I said, opening my assessment form. Catherine hesitated. "There's my ex, Marcus. We broke up 6 months ago when I caught him going through my research files. He's possessive." The way she said possessive raised flags. Restraining order? No. He never did anything explicitly threatening until now. He's well connected with the real estate developers I'm exposing in my documentary. I took detailed notes, maintaining professional distance despite the way my stomach nodded seeing her distress. After an hour's assessment, my instincts screamed that her ex was behind this. "I'll need to run background checks, set up surveillance protocols, and assess your home security," I explained. "Starting tonight." That evening, I positioned myself in an unmarked car outside Catherine's downtown apartment building. My business partner had raised eyebrows when I took the case personally instead of assigning it. "She's just a client," I'd insisted. Around midnight, Catherine texted from upstairs. "Can't sleep. Too jumpy." I should have sent a professional response. Instead, "Try reading that awful Russian novel you recommended. That'll knock you out." 3 dots appeared, disappeared then. Security services and literary criticism, I'm getting my money's worth. I smiled, then caught myself. This was exactly what Ryan, my partner, had warned about: personal involvement compromising judgment. At 2 a.m., Catherine invited me up for coffee. Against better judgment, I accepted. Her apartment reflected her personality: documentary posters on exposed brick walls, bookshelves overflowing, editing equipment in one corner. She wore loose pajama pants and a University of Michigan sweatshirt, her red hair tied back. "Sorry for the paranoia," she said, handing me coffee. "Not paranoia if the threat's real." We sat on her couch as she explained more about Marcus, his controlling behavior, how he'd gradually isolated her from friends. "Classic abuser pattern," I said. "Why didn't you mention this earlier?" Catherine stared into her mug. "Embarrassment? I document other people's struggles but couldn't see what was happening in my own life." Without thinking, I reached for her hand. That's how manipulation works, especially from people we trust. The touch lasted too long. When our eyes met, something electric passed between us. I pulled back first. "I should return to my post," I said stiffly. Standing at her door, Catherine caught my arm. "Hope, thank you." Over the next week, I established security protocols, installed monitoring systems, and ran comprehensive background checks. Marcus Henderson had a concerning history of harassment complaints from 2 previous relationships, all mysteriously dropped. "He's definitely capable of this," I told Catherine as we reviewed findings in her living room. "His connections could make this complicated." "What's next?" she asked, sitting closer than necessary. "I stay close until we identify his pattern and gather evidence." That night, I caught someone photographing Catherine's windows from a car across the street. When I approached, they sped away. But not before I captured their license plate. Registered to a security firm with connections to Marcus's development company. I rushed back upstairs, finding Catherine in her kitchen. Without thinking, I pulled her away from the windows. "Someone's watching," I explained, standing too close in her darkened apartment. Her breath caught. "Sometimes I feel like they're always watching." "Not while I'm here," I promised. Catherine looked up at me, vulnerability mixing with something else. Her hand rested on my arm. "You make me feel safe." The air between us thickened. I knew I should step back, maintain boundaries, stay professional, but when she moved closer, her fingertips brushing my cheek, all my trained discipline evaporated. When our lips met, softly at first, then with increasing urgency, I knew I'd crossed a line I couldn't uncross. A line that could compromise everything: her safety, my judgment, my career. But in that moment, with Catherine's hands tangled in my hair and her breath warm against my skin, I couldn't bring myself to care. The glass shattered inward, sending dangerous shards flying across Catherine's living room. I reacted on instinct, diving across the space to tackle her away from the window. The unmistakable pop of a small-caliber weapon echoed in the night air. "Stay down," I ordered, covering her body with mine. 3 seconds of assessment told me everything. Someone had shot at her apartment. This wasn't harassment anymore. I felt Catherine trembling beneath me. Hope, what's... Shooter outside. We need to move. Now. My training kicked in. I pulled her toward the hallway, staying low. Gotta go, bag? Catherine nodded, remarkably composed despite her shaking hands. Closet, left side. Grab it. 30 seconds. Leave everything else. While she collected her emergency bag, I checked exit routes on my phone. The building's back stairwell would be safest. I sent a rapid alert to my security team, then retrieved my backup weapon from my ankle holster. When Catherine returned, I grabbed her hand. Stay behind me, move when I move, stop when I stop. Clear? She nodded, eyes wide but focused. The hallway was clear, the stairwell too. But as we approached the service exit, I heard footsteps. I signaled Catherine to freeze, listening intently. The footsteps receded. Change of plans, I whispered. Too risky. Back up to the roof. We climbed silently to the roof access door. The autumn air hit us with a chill as we emerged. I scanned for threats, then guided Catherine to the adjacent building. An advantage of these old Detroit warehouses turned apartments was their connected rooftops. We need to get 4 blocks east where my team can extract us, I explained. 2 buildings later, Catherine stumbled. Her ankle twisted on loose gravel and she fell with a cry of pain. When I tried helping her up, she couldn't put weight on it. Can't walk, she gasped. Without hesitation, I lifted her into my arms. She was lighter than expected, her body fitting against mine like she belonged there. Despite the danger, I noticed the scent of her shampoo, something citrusy and fresh. I've got you, I murmured, moving as quickly as possible across the rooftops. Catherine's arms wrapped around my neck, her face pressed against my shoulder. My documentary footage, she whispered. All my work, it's back there. Backed up? Cloud storage, but then it's safe. You're what matters now. By the time we reached the extraction point, my arms burned from carrying her. Ryan was waiting in an unmarked car, his expression darkening when he saw Catherine in my arms. Safe house on Woodward, I directed, helping Catherine into the back seat. At the safe house, a nondescript apartment my firm maintained for emergencies, I examined Catherine's ankle. Not broken, just badly sprained. As I wrapped it, the adrenaline began wearing off, leaving us both shaky. Why would Marcus escalate to shooting? She asked, wincing as I secured the bandage. Maybe it wasn't him, I said. Your documentary targets powerful people. Thunder rolled outside as an autumn storm moved in. The rain started slowly, then became a downpour, drumming against the windows. Catherine hugged herself. I never thought it would go this far. I sat beside her on the sofa. This is why I don't do creative work, too dangerous. Her laugh was shaky. Says the woman who carries a gun. We fell silent, the gravity of the situation settling around us. Catherine's hand found mine in the dim light. I was terrified, she admitted. But not when you were holding me. I should have maintained professional distance. Instead, I confessed, Afghanistan second tour. Our convoy hit an IED. I pulled my team from burning vehicles while taking fire. I never shared this with clients. That fear never really leaves you. Catherine's fingers traced the scar on my forearm. Is that from then? I nodded. Some scars heal better than others. And the ones inside? She asked softly. Those just get managed. The lights flickered once, twice, then went out completely as the storm intensified. In the sudden darkness, Catherine moved closer. I've spent my career documenting other people's struggles, she whispered. Their pain, their resilience. But I've always been behind the camera, never in the story. I found her face with my hand in the darkness, thumb gently tracing her cheekbone. How does it feel, being in the story? Terrifying, she breathed. Exhilarating. Lightning flashed, illuminating her face inches from mine. The thunder that followed couldn't mask the sound of my heartbeat. When our lips met this time, it wasn't the careful kiss from her apartment. This was hunger, fear, need, all the emotions of survival pouring through us. Rain lashed against the windows as clothing fell away. In the storm's intermittent light, I discovered Catherine's body with reverent hands, memorizing every curve, every response. Our coming together was both fierce and tender, a rebellion against the dangers surrounding us, an affirmation that we were alive. That connection was possible even in darkness. Afterward, wrapped in blankets as the storm raged on, Catherine traced patterns on my skin. "Is this how it always is for you? Danger, then?" "No," I said truthfully. "This has never happened before." 3 weeks after the shooting, I stood in the back of a packed theater, scanning faces instead of watching the screen. Catherine's documentary premiere had drawn Detroit's cultural elite, politicians, and activists, all potential threats in my assessment. I'd positioned my security team at key points throughout the venue, but kept the most important post for myself: eyes on Catherine. She looked transformed from the frightened woman I'd carried across rooftops. Tonight, Catherine commanded attention in a simple black dress, her red hair elegantly styled, addressing the audience with confidence during the post-screening conda. Only I could see the slight tremble in her hands when difficult questions arose. "Your documentary exposes corruption between city officials and developers," one audience member said. "Weren't you afraid of retaliation?" Catherine's eyes briefly found mine before she answered. "Truth comes with risks, some worth taking." I allowed myself a moment of pride watching her. During our weeks lying low, she'd edited the final cut remotely, determined that threats wouldn't silence her work. The documentary was powerful, exposing how certain developers had manipulated zoning laws and displaced vulnerable communities. No wonder someone had shot at her window. When the lights came up after thunderous applause, I resumed full surveillance mode. The after-party would be harder to secure, too many people moving unpredictably in the gallery space next door. "Ryan, cover the main entrance," I directed through my earpiece. "Daniels, stay near the refreshments." Everyone had photos of Marcus and instructions to alert me immediately. Catherine found me as guests began migrating to the reception. "You didn't watch a single minute, did you?" she asked, smiling. "I watched you," I replied, keeping my voice professional despite wanting to pull her close. "You were magnificent." Her fingers briefly touched mine, hidden between us. "Come congratulate me properly when this is over." I maintained my post along the perimeter of the gallery, watching Catherine accept praise and field questions. She'd become important to these people, a voice exposing uncomfortable truths. She'd always been important to me. "Target spotted," Ryan's voice came through my earpiece. "East entrance, blue suit." I turned slowly, locating Marcus immediately. He looked exactly like his photos, handsome in that polished, privileged way that had always made me wary. He held a champagne flute, smiling cordially with a small group, but his eyes tracked Catherine constantly. "Hold positions," I instructed my team. "Let's see what he does." Marcus circulated the room, gradually working toward Catherine. I paralleled his movement, keeping physical barriers between them while staying invisible, a skill honed through years of protection work. When he finally approached her, I was close enough to hear their exchange. "Powerful work, Cat," he said, using the nickname she'd told me she hated. "Though rather one-sided, wouldn't you say?" Catherine's posture stiffened, but her voice remained steady. "Marcus, surprised you came. Wouldn't miss my ex's big moment." He leaned closer. "Especially when it targets my clients. They're public figures making public decisions," she replied. "The truth isn't targeted harassment." His smile tightened. "Speaking of harassment, your new security detail seems excessive. Feeling unsafe?" I moved then, seemingly casual but purposeful, positioning myself within Catherine's sightline. Our eyes met briefly, hers showing relief, his noticing our connection. "Miss Lewis," I said professionally, "your interview with Channel 7 is ready." Catherine nodded gratefully. "Excuse me, Marcus." As she turned away, Marcus caught her arm. "We should talk privately sometime, Cat, about old times." I stepped forward. "Please release Ms. Lewis's arm, sir." His eyes assessed me with new interest. "And you are?" "Someone who takes her safety seriously." Marcus released Catherine but leaned toward me. "Interesting. She's moved from one protector to another. Did she tell you how this ends?" "She gets bored playing damsel." I maintained neutral expression. "This way, Ms. Lewis." Once away from Marcus, Catherine exhaled shakily. "Thank you. He'll be watching." We maintained professional distance until we're clear. The rest of the evening crawled by. Marcus stayed, observing from across the room, occasionally raising his glass in Catherine's direction. His behavior was calculated, just threatening enough to unnerve her, just civil enough to avoid ejection. When the event finally ended, I escorted Catherine to the waiting car. "He said things about us," she whispered once inside. "How did he know?" "He didn't," I explained, checking for tails as we pulled away. "He was fishing, but your reaction confirmed his suspicions." Catherine leaned against me, professional pretense abandoned. "I hate that he still affects me this way." At my apartment, now our primary location since her building remained compromised, Catherine kicked off her heels and collapsed onto the couch. "Everyone loved the documentary," she said. "3 distributors want to talk terms." I secured the door before joining her. "You did something important tonight." "So did you," she replied, curling against me. "You kept me safe." In the quiet that followed, her lips found mine, soft and insistent. The restrained tension of the evening dissolved into urgent touches. "I wanted to do this all night," she breathed against my neck. "Watching you watching over me like some beautiful, dangerous guardian." Later, tracing patterns on her bare shoulder as she slept, I realized how deeply Catherine had penetrated my carefully constructed defenses. This wasn't just protection anymore. This was something I hadn't allowed myself since before my military days. This was falling in love, and it terrified me more than any threat I'd ever faced. "You're compromised, Hope," Ryan said, tossing the surveillance photos onto my desk. "These were taken outside your apartment building." The images showed Catherine and me entering my building, her hand in mine, my arm protective around her waist. Another showed us on my balcony, faces close, clearly intimate. "Who took these?" I demanded. "One of our own security analysts. I asked him to follow you." Ryan's expression hardened. "You're sleeping with a client during an active threat situation." I stood, anger rising. "You had no right." "I have every right as your business partner. This violates every protocol we established." He pointed at the photos. "If these fell into the wrong hands, they won't. They already have." Ryan slammed his hand on the desk. "I've been in this business 20 years. The moment you start thinking with your heart instead of your head, people get hurt." I knew he was right, which made it worse. "I can handle this." "No, you can't. I'm reassigning Catherine's case." "The hell you are." Ryan's voice softened. "Hope, look at yourself. You haven't slept properly in weeks. You're missing details. Yesterday you failed to notice the same car passing the office 3 times. I hadn't noticed. That scared me. Either you remove yourself from her security detail, or I pull our entire firm from the case." His ultimatum hung in the air. I left without answering, driving too fast to the editing studio where Catherine was working on her documentary distribution cut. She looked up from her computer when I entered, her smile fading as she read my expression. "What happened?" Before I could answer, my phone rang. The security detail outside her studio. "Howard." "Ma'am, someone vandalized Miss Lewis's car." Message scratched into the paint. I rushed Catherine outside. "Stay behind me." The words, "watching you," were carved deeply into her car's hood. "This is escalating," I said, examining the damage. "And it's not just Marcus anymore." Back inside, Catherine paced the small editing room. "What do you mean, not just Marcus?" "The documentary exposed multiple people. Any one of them could be behind this." Catherine stopped pacing. "There's something you're not telling me." I handed her the surveillance photos Ryan had shown me. "We've been compromised. Ryan wants me off your case." She stared at the images. "These are from 2 nights ago. How?" "Ryan had me followed. He's right to be concerned." "So what now?" Her voice shook slightly. "Catherine." I stepped closer, struggling to separate professional assessment from personal feelings. "I can't protect you properly if I'm..." I gestured between us. "If you're what? Caring about me?" Her blue eyes flashed. "That's damn convenient, Hope." "It's reality," I argued. "My judgment is compromised." "So I'm just a security risk now?" She gathered her things angrily. "Take me home, to my home, not yours." The drive to her apartment was silent. I'd arranged for the broken window to be replaced and additional security installed, but hadn't told her my team had discovered the bullet wasn't fired from street level. It had come from another building, requiring professional skill. Inside her apartment, Catherine went straight to the kitchen, pouring a glass of wine without offering me one. We need to be practical, I said. Practical, she repeated, the word like acid. Let me guess, we stay apart until the danger passes? Very convenient way to end things. End things? I stepped forward, frustration mounting. I'm trying to keep you alive. No. You're running scared. Not of Marcus, not of whoever shot through my window. You're scared of this. She gestured between us, of feeling something real. The truth of her words hit like physical blows. I'd faced armed combatants with less fear than I faced the vulnerability of loving Catherine. That's not fair, I managed. Isn't it? I've spent weeks watching you build and maintain walls. You let me in just enough, then retreat behind your professional shield. I moved toward her, unable to maintain distance despite knowing she was right. Catherine? She backed away. Don't touch me unless you're willing to admit what this really is. I stopped, my hands falling to my sides. What do you want from me? Everything, she cried. The same everything I've been giving you. When I didn't immediately respond, she shook her head. Just go, Hope. Instead, I crossed the kitchen in 3 strides and kissed her with everything I'd been holding back. Fear, longing, need. Her resistance lasted only seconds before she was kissing me back, wine glass forgotten on the counter. We stumbled toward the bathroom, shedding clothes. The shower spray hit us both, hot water streaming over bodies pressed desperately together. Steam clouded around us as hands slid over wet skin, mouths found sensitive places, breaths came faster. Against shower tiles, under cascading water, we found each other again, all anger transmuted to passion, all professional barriers washed away. I memorized the arch of her back, the sounds she made, the way her wet red hair darkened to auburn against her pale shoulders. After, wrapped in towels, Catherine touched my face. Promise me something. Anything, I said, meaning it. No more hiding behind protocol. Whatever comes next, we face it together. I nodded, knowing I was making a promise my training screamed against. Together. That night, as Catherine slept beside me, my phone lit up with a text from an unknown number. She'll never be safe while you're distracted. Back away, or watch her suffer. I deleted it before Catherine could see, hating myself for the deception even as I pulled her closer in sleep. The confrontation happened faster than I anticipated. Catherine and I were leaving her favorite cafe when Marcus stepped directly into our path, his expression a careful mask of concern. Cat, he greeted her, ignoring me completely. You're not returning my calls. I'm worried about you. I positioned myself slightly forward, creating a barrier between them. Mr. Henderson, please step aside. Is your bodyguard speaking for you now? He asked Catherine, his voice dripping with false concern. This isn't healthy, Cat. Catherine's hand found mine, squeezing once before releasing it. What I need is for you to leave me alone, Marcus. I've made that abundantly clear. His eyes hardened momentarily before the mask slipped back into place. I'm sorry you feel that way. I only wanted to warn you that some people are upset about your documentary. People who might take action. The threat was thinly veiled. I stepped forward. That sounds remarkably like a threat, Mr. Henderson. His smile never reached his eyes. Just concern for an old friend. We're done here, I stated firmly, guiding Catherine past him. Marcus grabbed her arm. We're not done until I say. My training took over. In one fluid movement, I removed his hand from Catherine, twisted his arm behind his back, and pinned him against a nearby car. The whole maneuver took less than 2 seconds. Don't touch her again, I said quietly, my mouth near his ear. Next time, I won't be so gentle. Hope! Catherine's voice pulled me back. Let him go. I released him, stepping back as Marcus straightened his jacket, fury evident in his eyes despite his calm demeanor. Assault, he said smoothly. My lawyers will be in touch. Plenty of witnesses saw you grab her first, I responded, nodding toward the cafe windows where several patrons were watching. Leave now. Once he was gone, Catherine exhaled shakily. That was necessary, I finished, scanning our surroundings for additional threats. I was going to say terrifying. She looked at me differently. I've never seen that side of you before. It's always there, I admitted. Part of the job. That evening, Ryan called with disturbing news. We've been digging into Marcus's connections. He's more dangerous than we thought. Explain, I demanded, watching Catherine work at her laptop across my living room. He's tied to Westlake Development, not just professionally. His uncle is Charles Westlake. My blood chilled. Westlake Development was the primary target of Catherine's documentary, exposed for bribing city officials and forcing out low-income residents. There's more, Ryan continued. We found financial transfers suggesting he's hired private security, not the legitimate kind. After hanging up, I sat beside Catherine on the couch. We need to talk. She closed her laptop. That sounds ominous. I explained what we'd discovered about Marcus, watching her face pale with each revelation. So he wasn't just a controlling boyfriend, she said quietly. He was placed in my life to monitor my work. It seems likely, and now he's escalating. I took her hands in mine. Catherine, I think you need to leave Detroit temporarily. Run away. She pulled her hands back. After everything I've exposed? Not running. Strategic retreat. Just until we gather enough evidence against him. And what about us? She asked, the real question hanging between us. The text message I'd received nights before flashed in my mind. She'll never be safe while you're distracted. Followed by dozens more, each more threatening than the last. I think. The words burned my throat. I think we need distance. My presence is making you a bigger target. Catherine stood abruptly. Don't you dare. This isn't what I want, I said, standing to face her. But someone is using our relationship against us. So we let them win? Her voice broke. We let Marcus separate us? Not forever, I promised. Just until he's no longer a threat. Catherine paced the room, arms wrapped around herself. I've spent my career documenting people's struggles against forces trying to silence them. I won't become another victim too afraid to stand her ground. This isn't about fear, I argued. It's strategy. It feels like abandonment. The accusation hit like a physical blow. I've never been more present with anyone in my life than I am with you, I said quietly, which is exactly why I need to step back professionally. I care too much to be objective. Catherine stared out the window at Detroit's skyline. Where would I go? Ryan has a property in northern Michigan. Remote, secure. My team would maintain surveillance, but I would stay away. For how long? Until we neutralize the threat. She turned back to me, eyes glistening with unshed tears. And if I refuse? I crossed to her, taking her face in my hands. Then I stay and we fight. But I can't guarantee your safety if my judgment remains compromised. Because you love me, she whispered. The word hung between us, one I hadn't allowed myself to use even in my thoughts. Yes, I finally admitted, the truth breaking free. Because I love you, and it terrifies me more than any threat I've ever faced. Catherine leaned into me, her forehead against mine. 1 week, she eventually said. I'll go for 1 week while you gather evidence. Then I come back, and we face this together. That night, we held each other like it was the last time, memorizing touches, tastes, sounds. When morning came, I helped her pack a small bag, my heart heavier with each item she selected. This isn't goodbye, she insisted at the door, kissing me fiercely. This is just a pause. I watched the unmarked security vehicle drive away with Catherine inside, already feeling the physical ache of separation. My phone buzzed with a new text. Smart decision, soldier. Now let's see if you can stay away. The first week without Catherine was physical agony. I threw myself into surveillance, tracking Marcus's movements while staying invisible. Coffee shops, high-end restaurants, private clubs. I became his shadow, cataloging his contacts and conversations. The second week was worse. The third nearly broke me. You look like hell, Ryan commented, reviewing my surveillance photos. When did you last sleep? I'm fine, I insisted, though the dark circles under my eyes suggested otherwise. You're obsessed. That's different from fine. He wasn't wrong. Without Catherine, I'd become single-minded, pouring every waking moment into building a case against Marcus. My apartment felt hollow, haunted by memories of her laughter, her scent lingering on pillows I couldn't bring myself to wash. Marcus's pattern emerged gradually. 3 times weekly, He met with a man we identified as Victor Reeves, ex-military turned private security contractor with a reputation for operating in legal gray areas. Twice, I photographed them exchanging unmarked envelopes. Our limited contact was torture. Catherine and I had agreed on minimal communication, too risky with potential surveillance. Our conversations were brief, coded, always through secure channels Ryan established. "The lake is beautiful," she would say, meaning she was safe. "The weather here is challenging," I would reply, indicating we were making progress but facing obstacles. What remained unsaid filled the spaces between these stilted exchanges. "I miss you. I'm afraid. This hurts. I love you." 3 weeks into our separation, I tailed Marcus to an upscale bar downtown. He sat with Victor and 2 other men, their conversation animated but careful. I positioned myself at the counter, back turned, recording their conversation with specialized equipment. "Becoming a problem," Marcus was saying. "The documentary is gaining traction." "Your uncle wants this handled discreetly," Victor replied, voice barely audible above the ambient noise. "I don't care about discreet anymore. I want results." I tensed, straining to hear what followed. "The girlfriend is the problem," one of the other men said. "Remove the security detail and the filmmaker becomes accessible." My blood froze. They were discussing ways to get to Catherine through me. I slipped out before they could notice me, heart pounding. That night, I broke protocol and called Catherine directly. "I miss your voice," she said immediately, the formal pretense abandoned. "Catherine." Just saying her name eased something tight in my chest. "How are you really doing?" She sighed. "Climbing the walls. Working on a new project to stay sane." "New project?" "A documentary about domestic violence survivors. The isolation here. It's giving me perspective on control dynamics." Pride mixed with concern. Even in hiding, she was creating, fighting back in her own way. "When can I come home?" she asked, vulnerability evident in her voice. I hesitated, thinking of what I'd overheard. "We're making progress. Marcus is getting sloppy, making mistakes." "That's not an answer," she countered. "Hope, it's been almost a month." "I know," I said softly. "Just a little longer." After disconnecting, I reviewed what we'd gathered so far: photos, recordings, financial records showing Marcus's connections to intimidation tactics used against other journalists. It wasn't enough to ensure Catherine's safety yet. The next day, surveillance revealed Marcus entering an abandoned warehouse in Detroit's industrial zone. Against protocol, I decided to follow him inside rather than maintaining perimeter observation. The risk was calculated. I needed concrete evidence. The warehouse interior was dim, dust particles floating in beams of light from high windows. I moved silently through the space, hearing voices echo from an office area. Positioning myself behind stacked crates, I activated my recording device. "The northern Michigan location is confirmed," Victor was saying. "Remote cabin, minimal security." My heart stopped. They'd found Catherine. "When?" Marcus asked. "We can move tomorrow. She's alone most mornings when the security detail changes shifts." I'd heard enough. Backing away silently, I reached for my phone to warn Ryan and knocked over a metal can, the sound reverberating through the cavernous space. "Someone's here," Victor snapped. I ran, abandoning stealth for speed. Behind me, footsteps pounded. I reached the side exit and burst through, sprinting toward my vehicle. A shot rang out, concrete spitting chips near my feet. Once clear, I called Ryan. "They found her. Send reinforcements to the cabin immediately." "Already done," he responded. "But Hope, we've got another problem. Catherine left the safe house 3 hours ago." "What? Where is she?" "Our team tracked her to Detroit Metro Airport but lost her in the terminal." Cold fear gripped me. She's coming back. She doesn't know they found the location. I broke every speed limit driving to Catherine's apartment, praying she'd go there first. The lights were off, no sign of her. My own apartment was similarly empty. Where would she go? The answer hit me suddenly: her studio, the place she felt most herself. Night had fallen by the time I reached the converted warehouse where Catherine kept her editing space. A single light burned in her studio window. Relief flooded me, followed immediately by fresh fear. As I approached the building, my phone lit up with Catherine's message. I couldn't stay away anymore. We faced this together, remember? I texted back, "Don't move. I'm coming to you. Stay hidden." I picked the lock to the rear entrance of Catherine's studio building, drawing my weapon as I slipped inside. Years of training had taught me to move silently, to become shadow. The service stairs creaked once beneath my weight. I froze, listening for reaction. Nothing. Reaching the third floor, I paused outside Catherine's studio door, detecting voices inside. One was Catherine's. The other, male, Marcus. "I'm not afraid of you anymore," Catherine was saying, her voice steady but strained. "You should be," Marcus replied. "Do you know what your little exposé has cost my family, my uncle's reputation?" I eased toward the doorway, assessing options. The studio was open plan with few places to hide. Catherine stood near her editing desk, Marcus 10 feet away, his back partially to the door. He hadn't seen me yet. "Your uncle destroyed communities," Catherine countered. "People lost homes because of his corruption." "Business," Marcus spat. "Just business, until you decided to play hero." I caught Catherine's eye briefly over Marcus's shoulder. She maintained remarkable composure, not reacting to my presence. "Where's your bodyguard now?" Marcus taunted, stepping closer to her. "Guess she wasn't as devoted as you thought." "I'm right here," I announced, weapon raised. "Step away from her, now." Marcus turned slowly, unsurprised. "Finally. I was wondering how long you'd lurk in the shadows." That's when I noticed the slight bulge under his jacket. He was armed. The calculation changed instantly. "Catherine, move toward the door," I directed, keeping my aim steady. "She stays," Marcus countered, revealing a handgun. "We're having a reunion, the three of us." Catherine remained frozen, her eyes darting between us. I needed to de-escalate. "Marcus, you're surrounded," I lied smoothly. "My team has the building secured. Put down the weapon." He laughed. "Your team is chasing ghosts at an abandoned warehouse across town." Victor arranged a convincing diversion. My stomach dropped. The trap hadn't been for Catherine, it had been for me. "What do you want?" I asked, buying time, assessing angles. "Originally, just to scare her enough to stop the documentary release." His eyes narrowed. "But then you complicated things, getting personally involved. Unprofessional." "Says the man pointing a gun at his ex," Catherine interjected. "Still so brave," Marcus mocked. "Is that what attracted you to her, Hope? Her reckless courage?" I ignored the bait. "This ends now, Marcus. Whatever happens, there's evidence linking you to threats against Catherine. Walk away while you can." "Evidence?" He seemed genuinely amused. "Like what?" "Financial transfers to Victor Reeves. Surveillance footage of your meetings. Recorded conversations about targeting Catherine." His expression flickered with the first hint of uncertainty. "You're bluffing." Catherine moved then, shifting toward her computer. "She's not. I've been documenting everything since I left." Marcus swung his weapon toward her. "Don't move!" That split-second distraction was all I needed. I lunged forward, closing the distance between us. The first rule of close-quarters combat with armed opponents: control the weapon. I grabbed his gun hand, forcing it upward as a shot discharged into the ceiling. We struggled, his superior size against my specialized training. I struck his wrist against the edge of a metal desk. Once, twice, the gun clattered to the floor. Marcus landed a blow to my ribs that knocked the wind from me. As I staggered back, he dove for the fallen weapon. What happened next seemed to unfold in slow motion. Catherine appeared behind him, camera tripod in hand. She swung it with surprising force, connecting with the side of Marcus's head. He collapsed, momentarily stunned. I kicked the gun away, then pinned Marcus to the floor, securing his hands behind his back with zip ties from my pocket. "Catherine," I gasped, fighting to catch my breath. "Are you hurt?" She shook her head, dropping the tripod. "I got everything." "What?" She pointed to her professional camera mounted in the corner of the studio. "I recorded it all. His confession, the assault, everything." Sirens wailed in the distance. Someone had reported the gunshot. As we waited for police, snow began falling outside the studio windows, large flakes illuminated by streetlights. Later, at the hospital where I was being examined for bruised ribs, Catherine sat beside me, refusing to leave despite officers waiting to take her statement. "You could have been killed," I admonished, wincing as the doctor pressed on my side. So could you, she countered. That was the point of my documentary. Some things are worth the risk. The doctor excused himself to retrieve supplies, leaving us momentarily alone. I told you not to come back, I said softly. Catherine took my hand, her thumb tracing circles on my palm. And I told you we face things together. Stubborn. Protective, she countered. When her fingers brushed gently across the bruise forming on my cheekbone, I caught her hand, pressing it against my face. I was so afraid of losing you, I admitted, the words coming easier now that the danger had passed. When I realized he'd found you. But you found me first, she interrupted. You always do. Snow continued falling outside the hospital window, casting the room in quiet winter stillness. Despite the pain in my ribs, I pulled Catherine closer, kissing her with all the fear and relief and love I'd held back during our separation. Don't ever disappear again, I whispered against her lips. She smiled, a promise in her eyes. Not without my bodyguard. 3 months after Marcus's arrest, I stood at the window of my downtown apartment, watching spring gradually reclaim Detroit. The legal proceedings had moved with surprising efficiency once Catherine's footage went public. Marcus faced multiple charges: assault, criminal harassment, conspiracy, while investigations into Westlake development continued expanding. My phone buzzed with a message from Ryan. Singapore client confirmed. Departure in 3 days. You sure about this? I stared at the text, conflict churning inside me. The Singapore assignment was prestigious, protecting a tech billionaire during a 6-month global tour, the kind of high-profile job that could cement my firm's international reputation, the kind of job I'd have jumped at 3 months ago. Before Catherine. Still thinking about it? Her voice came from behind me as arms wrapped around my waist, her chin resting on my shoulder. Just logistics, I lied, not wanting her to know my doubts. Catherine stepped around to face me. Hope Howard, terrible liar. Her red hair was pulled back, revealing the freckles I'd memorized across her nose. Those knowing blue eyes saw right through me. I should take it, I said. It's an important client. Then take it. Her tone was maddeningly reasonable. 6 months will pass quickly. You'd be alone. Catherine laughed. I survived, Marcus. I think I can handle Detroit by myself for a few months. But that was exactly what troubled me. Leaving her alone after everything we'd been through. Long-distance relationships were difficult under the best circumstances. With our history, the separation felt dangerous, like tempting fate. What if? I began. No what ifs, she interrupted. My documentary is being screened at festivals. Your security firm is expanding internationally. We both have careers that matter. I pulled her closer. You matter more. Before she could respond, my phone rang. Ryan again, wanting confirmation about Singapore. Catherine gently pushed me toward it. Answer. It's fine. Later that evening, Catherine disappeared for hours, claiming a meeting with her production team. When she returned, she was suspiciously excited despite my impending departure. I need to show you something, she announced, taking my hand. Grab your jacket. She drove us to her studio building, leading me up the familiar stairs. But instead of turning toward her workspace, she continued to the floor above, stopping at a door I'd never noticed. Close your eyes, she instructed. Security specialists don't close their eyes, I protested. Former military badasses who love their girlfriends do, she countered. I complied, feeling her guide me forward into a space that smelled of fresh paint and new carpet. When she told me to look, I opened my eyes to find myself in a beautifully renovated loft space. Modern furniture, state-of-the-art security systems, and, most surprisingly, a professional-grade home studio set up in one corner. What is this? I asked, turning slowly to take it all in. Our compromise, Catherine explained, eyes bright with excitement. I leased it last month. Our compromise? She gestured around the space. I need to edit my films. You need to run your security operation. This space has room for both. I moved toward the studio setup, noticing the dual workstations, one obviously configured for video editing, the other for security operations with multiple monitors. You did all this in a month? Catherine nodded. The building owner owed me a favor after my documentary helped prevent developers from forcing him out. I was speechless, taking in the implications. She'd created a space where both our professional lives could coexist. But Singapore, I started. Take the assignment, she said firmly. Go be brilliant. This will be waiting when you return. She paused, a flicker of vulnerability crossing her features. I'll be waiting. I pulled her into my arms. You're extraordinary. I'm practical, she corrected. I watched you these past weeks, torn between what you want and what you think you should want. And what do I want? I asked softly. Me, she said simply, but also your work. Both can exist without sacrificing either. That night, back at my apartment, I made the call to Ryan, accepting the Singapore assignment with one condition. I needed state-of-the-art remote monitoring equipment installed at a new location. In bed later, Catherine curled against me, her breath warm against my neck. 6 months will fly by, she murmured sleepily. 4, I corrected. I negotiated it down to 4. She laughed softly. See? Compromise? Morning light filtered through the blinds as I watched Catherine sleep, memorizing the curve of her cheek, the flutter of her eyelashes. I thought about the unlikely path that had brought us together. A random book club, a security threat, danger and separation and reunion. When she opened her eyes, finding me watching her, she smiled. What are you thinking, security specialist? That I never expected this, I admitted. Any of it. Catherine stretched, cat-like in her contentment. Expected what? To find someone who understands that protecting people is more than my job, it's who I am. And who understands that telling stories is more than my job, she added. It's how I make sense of the world. I kissed her, soft and lingering. 4 months. 4 months, she agreed. Then home. Home, not my apartment or hers. Not the new studio space. Just wherever we were together. The realization settled over me with surprising peace. After years of living on high alert, I'd found safety in the most unexpected place, loving Catherine and being loved in return. For a security specialist who'd built a career on preparing for worst-case scenarios, it was the best possible outcome.